A US congressman has just warned India. He says Parliament is about to pass a law that would allow the government to quote unquote take over churches and religious charities. He calls it a clear attack against Christians. He even says it could hurt India-US ties. Strong words. He's referring to the FCRA Amendment Bill or the Foreign Contribution Regulation Bill 2026. But here's the obvious question. Which clause of the bill is he talking about? Because if you actually read the proposed amendments to India's FCRA Amendment Bill 2026, that claim becomes difficult to explain. So did Congressman Riley Moore actually read the bill, or did someone in his office hand him a talking point and ask him to hit post on X? Let's break it down. Let's go to the tweet that started it all. Republican Congressman Riley Moore from West Virginia posted on X claiming that India's proposed FCRA amendments would allow the government to take over churches and religious institutions. He wrote that Christians have existed in India since the time of St. Thomas the Apostle and called the bill a clear attack against Christians. He then added that if the legislation passes in its current form, it would become a major concern in India-US bilateral relations. That's a very serious allegation, which is why it deserves an equally serious fact check. Here's what the proposed amendment actually does. Today, if an NGO or organization loses this FCRA registration, whether because it was cancelled, surrendered, or not renewed, the law isn't entirely clear about what happens to foreign-funded assets. Now, the new bill proposes creating a designated authority, and its job is to temporarily manage the foreign contributions and assets created using foreign funds after an organization loses its FCRA registration. Now notice the wording. It doesn't say churches. It doesn't say Christians. It doesn't even single out religious organizations. It applies to any entity covered under the FCRA framework. NGOs, trusts, charitable institutions, charitable bodies, and religious organizations alike. And then comes perhaps the most inconvenient line for Congressman Moore's argument. The bill explicitly says that if the asset is a place of worship, its religious character must be maintained. Read that again. Not converted, not confiscated, not altered. Its religious character must be maintained. So where exactly is this alleged provision permitting a government takeover of churches? Because it's not obvious from the text of the bill. So which clause is Riley Moore referring to? This is where the debate becomes interesting. Congressman Moore makes a sweeping claim, but he never points to a specific clause. No section number, no legal provision, no explanation of how he arrived at this conclusion. Just a broad allegation, which raises another question. Has he actually read the legislation? Or is this one of those cases where lawmakers outsource policy reading to staffers, receive a one-page briefing, and then confidently announce sweeping conclusions on social media? Because if you are accusing the world's largest democracy of targeting an entire religious community, the least one could expect is a citation from the bill itself, not just an ambiguous tweet. American concern over India's FCRA law is not new. Back in 2015, Washington sought clarification from India after the Home Ministry suspended Greenpeace India's registration and placed the Ford Foundation on a watch list. Just weeks before Moore's remarks, a bipartisan group of American lawmakers had already expressed concern over India's proposed FCRA changes, right before the G7 summit in France. Around the same time, the US dropped Indo from its Indo-Pacific Command, reverting it back to simply US Pacific Command, a symbolic shift that raised eyebrows in Delhi. So Moore's warning lands in an already sensitive diplomatic window, not a calm one. Now let's come to India's real debate over FCRA bill. Now, whether you support or oppose the amendments in 2026 is a different discussion altogether. But let's look at the for and against arguments. Supporters argue that it prevents foreign funds from being used to influence India's internal affairs, strengthening national security. The naysayers say that the bill brings in tighter controls, which would limit the ability of NGOs to operate independently. Point number two, the government says that the bill seeks to ensure overseas donations are used only for their declared purposes and not diverted elsewhere. Opposition argues that vague provisions allow for arbitrary suspension, cancellation of registrations. Point number three, government says that the purpose is to ensure that overseas donations are used only for their declared purposes, not diverted elsewhere. The other side argues that fear of regulatory action could discourage organizations from maybe working on sensitive issues, maybe human rights issues or governance issues. Point number four, those in favor say that the bill gives the government greater powers to monitor compliance and take action against violations, and that improves overall trust in genuine NGOs. The opposition is arguing that increased paperwork and reporting requirements could affect smaller NGOs with limited resources. Now, that debate has existed for years. Successful governments have tightened FCRA oversight. Thousands of registrations have either expired or been cancelled over the years. According to the Ministry of Home Affairs, over 13,500 organizations received more than 55,000 crore rupees in foreign contributions between 2019 and 2022. 55,000 crore rupees. As on July 2026, over 14,000 organizations still hold active FCRA registrations. So this is a regulatory debate, not automatically a religious one. India's FCRA has always been controversial. It affects thousands of organizations. It influences how foreign money enters the country. It deserves scrutiny, but scrutiny works only when it's based on facts. If a US congressman believes that the bill authorizes government takeover of churches, the obvious next step is simple: show us the clause. And in this case, the text of the bill appears to tell a more nuanced story than a viral tweet. You're watching Times Access. This is Aditi Prasad, and if you like this explainer, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and never miss an update from us.